Welcome to the New England and New York Real Estate Journal podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan, and I got a very great show for you today. I have a guest, and I've known him for quite a while. It's Greg Vasil. He's the CEO of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Rick. It's great to see old friends again.
It is. It's been a little while. You know, we went through a pandemic and now we're going through a lot of issues with housing, in which we're going to talk a little bit on. But before we get to that, I want to ask you a little bit about the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, and anyone that's not familiar with it, they should be aware of it. If they're not and they're in the business, then they should find out about it because it's important for them to know. It's a great advocate for people in the industry.
Well, thanks, Rick. The Greater Boston Real Estate Board is the oldest real estate trade association in America. It's 135 years old. It was founded in 1889 by a group of commercial real estate people that were dealing with a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today, a growing Boston, but not enough land mass. And at that time, the Back Bay had just been filled in from being tidal to being developable land. Places where, Newbury Street, Arlington Street now are a thriving retail and residential area of the city was basically backwater. So the board was involved in a lot of the land use planning and thought process of how Boston expanded and grew. And over the years, we've sort of morphed into 5 divisions. We have 13,000 members total. 11,000 of those are residential realtor brokers, and the other 2,000 are commercial. So we do multifamily residential. We're a federation of BOMA Boston. BOMA International, BOMA Boston is here. The Real Estate Finance Association, the Massachusetts Apartment Association, and the Commercial Brokers Association, as well as the Greater Boston Association of Realtors.
So you cover all aspects of commercial real estate, pretty much.
Rick, what we like to say is if you see a crane in the sky on a project, you're guaranteed that there's a lot of people involved in that project that are members of our organization.
See, and that's why I said it's so valuable. If you're in the industry, you should be a member. Yeah. Well, there's our little promo for the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. Now, let's get into the dirt of the industry, and that right now is the housing market. We're having some issues here, and whether it's part of the people that are in the industry or part of our government, we have to figure out how we both can be together on it to make it work. Right now we're talking, I just saw the article that the governor wants to put together 26 affordable housing. Now, I'm not sure how she's doing this and where the money is coming from. And I guess that there's developers that are interested in this already. And I'm not sure if that's the case, but she has pinpointed 26 locations that they want to put affordable housing. So what do you think? And how do you think this is going to happen?
Well, we definitely know that we have a housing crisis. And one of the biggest issues that the industry is dealing with is there's 2 ways to approach it. There's the production angle, and then there's the protection angle. And by protection, I mean things like increasing tenants' rights, rent control, tenants' rights to purchase, first right of refusal when a property gets sold. And then there's the whole, we don't have enough product, we need to create more, so we need to produce. Some of those protection aspects of it really impinge on production. So, the governor has sort of charted a middle course on the protection aspect, saying, rent control may be able to work at the local level, but not coming out and endorsing anything sort of from a state perspective. But she has been pushing the idea of creating affordable housing in locations, especially on surplus state land. That's something that we have been supportive of. Back about 20 years ago in my career, I actually was working for an organization called Mass Development. And we were looking to repurpose some of the former state hospital sites to do just that. Some of those came to fruition. There'd been development in places like at the Foxborough State Hospital a little bit, Northampton State Hospital. Those are prime locations, I think, now that if we can get it and get the government to put some money in and make it cash positive for private developers, then turn it over to the private sector and let them take it the rest of the way. But we're encouraged that she's really focused on the production aspect as opposed to the protection aspect of government regulation.
Well, I think that's probably the key, because they've always been looking at, well, the developer has to take this hit, which the developers can't take a hit. I mean, I know that everyone thinks they're fat and happy, and yeah, if anyone has ever been a developer, which most people haven't, this is not an easy thing to put together. There's a lot of components that go into putting together a project, and a lot of ways that you have to find financing as well. Without government support in this and funding, I can't see how the developers can make these work. And so it's important. Another thing I want to mention is we have so many of these titles out there: affordable housing, workforce housing, subsidized housing, the list goes on and on and on. But is there anything that is really working well?
Well, when you get to the whole title aspect of it, Rick, that's the problem. People think affordable housing. So what does that really mean? Is that heavily government subsidized? Is it Section 8? Or is it housing that people that live in the community can afford? Like, say you're in a community like Arlington or Belmont, affordable housing can be the kind of housing that the second grade elementary school teacher could live in, or the firefighter, or the police officer. So, I mean, there are different aspects that are out there that are working, but I think we can do better and we need to do better. I mean, we're starting to see a little bit of that now with the MBTA communities law, pushing communities to zone for multifamily residential. A lot of communities for a long time didn't want that. Oh, they would be very progressive and very enlightened and want to save the world, but they didn't want to do what it really takes to create the units that we need. A perfect example is if you're ever in Washington, D.C., and you look at some of the development that's gone on there on the apartment side, there's a lot of big, tall buildings. Economically, to get back to your point, that will work for a developer because you've increased density. And for developers, it's a math problem. If the math doesn't pencil out, they'll go find another site. Some people will say, well, I want development, but I only want this kind of development. I mean, we were doing a focus group dealing with some development, and one of the people in the focus group was from Beacon Hill. And she's talking about the need for affordable housing and we need more production, but she doesn't want those tall buildings. She thinks we need more brownstones constructed on Beacon Hill. And we're scratching our head saying, lady, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be building brownstones with the cost of masons, especially at a union rate on Beacon Hill. That's not going to happen in our lifetime. So, we need to do more. There are some programs that are successful, and there are some that don't do enough.
Yeah, it's funny how they never think about how there's two things that have to work together: working class people and affordable housing. Now, if you take the working class person and figure out what their income is and what they can afford for housing, you should be able to maybe work out something. Maybe your government has to afford a subsidized part of that or whatever it takes. But if they're working, they should be able to have housing. Now, we've had there's a lot of discussion about people that take advantage of the system, which that in some cases does hurt the whole program, because when they take advantage of the system, they also don't really have any value to the system, and then you have the landlords that are working with a lot of destruction to their properties, and the cost to maintain them is just through the roof, and their tenants are not really paying their way on that. So if that was a working class person, that might be a different story. So yeah, I think you have to evaluate the type of people you want to bring into these, and then you have to uh, build something that is affordable for them. I mean,
Well, and Rick, here, let me give you a situation that I think it was sort of highlights what you just mentioned. I was approached by a gentleman that I've known for a long time. And he said, Greg, I need some help. He said, I have a girlfriend and we have a 3-year-old child. She lives in heavily subsidized housing because of her income level. I want to move in with them and we want to become a family and raise that child. But here's the problem. If I do that, she'll no longer income qualify for her housing and we've got nowhere to go because we can't afford anything else. What do we do? And that's exactly the problem. We need to have housing at different income levels that can take people from the heavily subsidized, and when they improve, work harder, get a better job, they've got a place to go. There's no incentive for some of those people to move up and out and to allow that other property to be backfilled by somebody who has a lower income. So, we need to create stuff, and maybe we deed restrict it at different income levels.
yeah, see, and what you just mentioned is what we used to call the American way. Work hard, build up some wealth or something for yourself, and you gain your stature and in your the area you live. You can have a nicer home, you can have a better life for your family, and that kind of has been destroyed over the years, that American way, which is pretty sad because that's what built this country. And I hate to see that go away, but I have no choice. uh, but I want to get into these illegal immigrants that are coming in, because that's also going to affect all this. Before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Community Preservation Act, because that can come into effect in some of these projects as well.
Sure. So the Community Preservation Act is just over 20 years old. And it was created as a result of a push to create real estate a sales tax on real estate, transfer taxes. And that's what was really the birth of the CPA and Governor Cellucci signing it into law. The governor's housing bond bill that she just filed has a sales tax on real estate in it. So our whole point was, hey, wait a second. 20 years ago, we created the CPA, which is supposed to be for open space, historic preservation, and affordable housing. And now you want another tax on top of that. Why don't we look at the CPA and maybe fix it and change it and enhance it and modernize it so that it produces more? Now, we did a study with Tufts University back in the first half of 2023 that showed that over 30% of the communities that have embraced and are in the Community Preservation Act are not spending 10% of their money on affordable housing like the law requires them to do. And it's frustrating because when you really drill down and look at the CPA, they don't have to produce units. All they need to do is put the money in a bank account like a housing trust, and it can be parked there and sit there. It can be used for maintenance. It can be used for paying salaries of people involved in housing in the community, but it doesn't have to actually create units that people live in. And to us, that's a problem. The goal should be that money should be spent to create places for people to live, not a pot of money that they can use to fund other housing activities, because there are a number of communities that don't want to build the housing. They like it the way it is, and they just want to keep their community static. And as we see things change, we can't do that. We have to be able to change and meet the needs of a growing population.
Well, I think you said this before. When you have people that have incentive to try to get out of that situation they're in, which might be they're in affordable housing or subsidized housing, and they work their way into maybe buying a house or moving into a regular apartment, nicer apartment complex. Um, I think that gives these cities and towns, they get that reputation or the what do they call it? Um, they get a reputation of having they're going to have all this trash or lower income people that are going to destroy these areas. It's going to bring a lot of trouble. So they don't want that. And I think gets that reputation for affordable properties has to change. And I think that's when the government steps in to give the incentive for people to move out or move above their means or to the means of a more affordable situation for themselves.
Well, we're seeing this right now in the job market. There's jobs around. If people thought, geez, I could move up to a better place to live by taking a second job at Marshall's and working an extra 15 or 20 hours, on weekends, they probably would do it. But they've got no place, they have nothing to aspire to because there's no place for them to live.
Well, it's almost they give them an incentive to stay where they are,
Right.
which is the wrong way to do this.
Well,
And
and Rick, that's exactly what's wrong with the advocates' argument about housing protections. Like rent control, what does it do? It keeps people in the unit. So there's no movement. People don't move, they don't move up, they don't move out, and that movement is vital to a healthy industry.
well, we'll go right into the rent control because I know you were a big advocate of trying to shut that down, with Mayor Wu wanting to bring it back. Now, I lived through rent control, and the property people, landlords, they couldn't even afford the properties because they were taking in such a small amount of rent at the time. I mean, people were living in two-bedroom apartments paying $100 a month, which it was crazy. And they would never, ever move out. Even when they might have bought a house down the road, they'd be living in this beautiful home and they'd still have that apartment because until they moved out, you know, they had $100 a month apartment. It was great. You have $100 a month apartment in the city and you can have a beautiful home in the suburbs. You can't get any better than that. So it wasn't working. As a matter of fact, I had an uncle that had a bunch of apartments in the city of Boston and some in Cambridge, and it was ridiculous because the tenants would stay there forever, and then they have someone else move in if they were moving out. It was a crazy time. So it wasn't working, and I don't know how they think it would work again.
Well, I mean, her proposal was designed to be um, very moderate in her view. The problem is every place that rent control has been put in, it always starts moderate. And then the government continues to crank it down and make it more draconian. And, so it was only a matter of time. She ran on that platform. It was a political thing for her. She gets it in place and she's on to her next job as it gets cranked down and kills the industry. But they don't really care because they've already moved on to something bigger and better.
Yeah, that back in the 70s, it wasn't as it wasn't as big a deal because you know everyone's thought, okay, affordable housing, that now we have all these programs. We have rent subsidies. We have affordable housing projects that have been around. Uh, you know, you have all these things in place. Why do you have to have now rent subsidy, a rent control on top of that? You know, it didn't make any sense. You know,
Rick, ideologically too, it's a different form of government. It's more of a lean towards what should our government be? Should we be more socialist? Like, should all public transportation be free? And I think they'd be great to have free buses, but I look at the state of the T And I wonder, how is that possible when it's broken and we pay for it now? It'd be great if it was free, but somebody has to pay the tea and somebody has to pay to fix it.
Yeah, and when you don't run things so efficiently, I don't know how you could ever do something for free, because the cost is just through the roof. But that's another show for
Yeah.
another time. So let's move on to the immigrants that have come in. And from my understanding, Massachusetts is one of those states that has the right to live, uh, which I'm not sure how many states have that. So anyone that is an immigrant that comes here, we can't turn them away.
Right. We are the only state that has the right to shelter law. There are some cities like New York City that are a right to shelter city, but we are the entire state, and we're the only one in the country that has that.
But they're coming into this country, well, into this state. They're housing them at the airport. From the facts that I'm told, there's been a lot of crime, a lot of issues with all these people sitting in the airport down there. Now we have to shuttle them around to other locations. Can this city even afford to have more crime and then bring them into these housing projects where they're going to create even more havoc? Does it even make sense?
Well, Rick, the interesting thing is, I don't know where they live, where they're going to be permanently housed, because a lot of these places don't have any vacancy. And the difficulty is now there's a number that want to work and they want to get the federal government to help them get work permits, but they need to be able to live near where they work. And that's not going to be easy. So, I don't know how this situation is going to play out. I mean, when you're looking at $1 billion a year, just about to pay for this, that's a lot of money when we have enough trouble and we can't house up people that live here. I mean, I don't, it's interesting.
Yeah, and that's what very confusing as well. They're crying and crying. We need more housing. And now we're taking in people that aren't even American citizens. We're taking them in and we want to find housing for them. I mean, we can't even find housing for the people that live here and are working. There's homeless out in the, on our streets still. We should be taking care of them first, I think. When you were talking about housing, that's the 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 people that should be first priority before we
Right.
start taking these immigrants in.
I mean, it's a really tough situation, and it's interesting because the law was passed in the '80s in a different time and place. And a lot of the focus has been, well, maybe it's on the federal government, maybe it's on the president because they've opened the borders more. And yeah, I mean, it definitely is a problem, but it creates a huge issue for us here with the law, the way it's drafted and on the books. I don't know if there's a political will, and I don't think there is to sort of change it. But I mean, it's tough because we already had a housing crisis, and then this makes it even harder because we just don't have places to put people.
Right. And I don't know when this immigration law has changed because I come from a family that I had my family, they were immigrants. They came. I think a lot of the people in this country come from immigrants, but it was a different way to come into the country.
Right.
You had to be subsidized, or not subsidized. You had to be hosted. You couldn't just come into the country, so you had to have someone that you knew that they were willing to put you up until you got your feet on the ground. You got very little in benefits until you were established. Now it's not like that. And it's not just a burden on the housing, it's a burden on the citizens of the country, I think. But that also would be for another show. There's a lot of things that all are all kind of connected to the housing market. Um, when we talk about the transportation, that's connected. You talk about the immigrants, it's connected. Anything that really happens is connected to the housing market because people need a place to live. And when we're not really, well, I shouldn't say we're not doing a good job because I think the developers are doing a pretty good job of finding places to do these projects that will put, you know, maybe 100 apartments or 400 apartments. And, they're finding these spots and they're doing what it needs to be done to put them in there, but it's just not enough. And is it not enough because they're not affordable, or is it not enough because, uh, you know, we people need to find more of a lower income property?
Well, Rick, the migrant problem really creates a numbers problem for real estate professionals because we just, we need to produce more. And when you look at sort of the real estate developers, their job is simple. I mean, their projects are math problems and political problems. If the numbers work, they'll build it. Then they switch over to the political side. Can I get the permits from the local community? And if I can do that, it's a go. If I can't, it's a no-go, and they move on to the next one. So, I mean, government's got to realize that.
Yeah, in some cases they do, in some areas they do, like there'll be enough TIF money for them to do a project and fix an area, develop that area. So that the government money will help that project along. But I think you need a little more incentive from the government to be able to afford to build, especially now with the cost of materials, the cost of land, all these things are just through the roof, so it's very difficult to put together the project. Um, so, I mean, that being said, you know, I think I don't think we solved any of the problems of the world in half an hour or so. But it sounds like the government is starting to come around a little bit, especially after seeing what the Governor Healy is talking about with these 26 projects. And it's not
Yes.
just in the city, it's all over. Now, I just did uh, an event, well, at the end of last year in Springfield. Now, Springfield, which is still part of Massachusetts. A lot of people don't realize that. But Springfield, there's a lot of opportunities in that area for housing. The problem is, until they can get the transportation system to go out there, you can't really get, a lot of the people that live and work outside of that area. So we do have areas that I think we can redevelop, but we have the issues that we have to be able to get employees and the proper shopping and all the other things that go along with the housing to be able to get back and forth. Because that Springfield isn't the only area. There's a lot of other areas that we could well, the south of Boston, there's a lot of areas that can be redeveloped. North of Boston, there's also a lot. But, it's all tied to the transportation, public transportation, which we've had some issues with as well.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
and yeah, hopefully that's ending. It looks like they're doing a good job of trying to put it back together. It should have never got to this point, but it looks like they're doing a pretty good job.
Well, I'm excited because right across from our office is the green line and the blue line. And finally, the other day, Monday, the green line reopened. So it was great to see people coming in and out of there again because it was a ghost town for a long, long time.
Yeah, and that's a shame that it had to get to that point. Public transportation is used in all major cities. how we got to have it so run down, I have no idea. That's a shame on you for the government. They did a poor job. I mean, keeping that going. So, but I think we covered almost everything, the good and the bad. Uh, uh, I'm not sure how much good we talked about, but it sounds like there might be good coming down the road.
Well, we definitely know that there's the housing bond bill, which had its hearing on the 18th of January before the Housing Committee up on Beacon Hill. We have a good sense that the legislature will be acting on that before the end of the session on July 31st of this year. So there'll be something coming on housing for sure. And that bond bill is over $4 billion. It's more than double the last bond bill that was passed. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, that's a nice way to end the show with something positive.
Yeah.
So I'd like to do that. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Greg. I know I ramble on a lot, so don't pay don't pay too much attention to what I say, but I do appreciate you coming on the show. And we're talking with Greg Vasil. He is the CEO of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. And again, Greg, anytime you want to come on and we got something to share with everyone, you always might be my guest. Okay?
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you. It was great to connect again, like I said before, with old friends.
Yeah, nice to see you again. And hopefully we'll see you in person shortly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we are listening to the New England and New York Real Estate Journal radio podcast. I used to do the radio show, so now I'm doing a podcast. I get them screwed up. It's the New England and New York Real Estate Journal podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Until next time.